So on behalf of myself and my fellow committee member with the Digital Transformation Lab, Tony Moroney, both of us will be hosting today. We'd love to welcome everyone to this event, Disruptive Technology Series event. And today we've the excellent Nicolas Babin. And Nicolas, and I think, I don't know how you can have 35 years of experience behind you, Nicolas, when you look so young and fresh. It must be something to do with the French air or something. Nicolas, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, and we'll then hand over to Tony to maybe start raising some questions.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you very much, Pauli, and hello, Tony, and everybody else. So I'm Nicolas Babin. I have, as you said, about over 35, close to 35 years of experience in new technology and innovation. So I've been around a lot of countries, starting with the US, UK, Japan, Germany, Belgium, and France now, where I'm located. And what I do today is I'm a consultant for many large companies like Google, IBM, or Amazon, or NG in France. But also I've started over 26 startups, failed quite a lot, but succeeded in some as well, always in new technologies and always in innovation.
Excellent. Well, Nicolas, you and I have been friends for a number of years, so absolutely thrilled to have you here. And Nicolas is an absolute expert in terms of disruption, technology, digital transformation, and I've learned loads from him over the years. So really delighted to have you here. Nicolas, your book, I've read the book, great book, and I would encourage everyone to read it. And I suppose what really stood out for me, Nicolas, and maybe we'll start here, is just the sheer pace of innovation in our lifetime. Like when you go through the book, because the book is really interesting the way you lay it out, sort of says, well, actually, if we look what's happened in the last 40, 50 years, it's quite extraordinary. So maybe talk a little bit about that and get us going.
Yeah, so I mean, I felt like, and a lot of my friends been telling me, you've been involved with so many new technologies, you need to write a book. And of course, COVID came, and that's what happened. But I thought it would be easier to understand where we're coming from in order to have a vision of where we're going. And today we're obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about metaverse and things like that, but a lot of people say, wow, new technology, innovation, it's amazing that metaverse can come alive. But actually, when you look at the past, it just makes sense that the metaverse is coming alive now, because we've obviously seen the start of the internet. Without internet, you wouldn't have metaverse. We've seen a lot of things. Well, I'm going to talk a lot about obviously the Sony type of products, because I was with Sony for a long time, but I realized there are other games than Sony. If I talk about games, for example, but PlayStation 1 through 5 have helped to invent this environment of gaming and of fun, of engagement, and all this. And then you've had obviously augmented reality. You've had VR, you've had extended reality, you've had AI coming alive, you've had robots like the one behind me on the side cover of my book, and all these, it's basically we're in a journey. We're on a journey ever since we're born, all the way to death, obviously, and then maybe after, and all this is basically this journey ensures that we take everything that's been invented, and each time we have a new breakthrough, like maybe metaverse, it's because it's been built for many years before. And when technologies come a little bit too early, for example, Second Life, with Sony, we had invented Home, which was exactly like Second Life. At the time, technology was not that great, and bandwidth for internet was very limited. So Second Life didn't succeed because people were not really engaged. There was no immersive environment that you can see today with the metaverse. And this is why, they have helped, definitely. And I know that Mark Zuckerberg has used the CEO of Second Life to launch his metaverse, because obviously he has some experience behind it. But everything needs to come at a time when it's right for not only the technology, but also for people mindset. And I know we'll talk about digital transformation. And digital transformation is not about digital. It's about changing a mindset. It's about putting people in the middle. And when people are involved and when people are used of using a new technology, then obviously you're going to be much more successful. And we've seen it many times, especially with Sony, where we had so many new technologies that were launched and were not at the right time. For example, GPS, and I talk about it in my book, but GPS came too early for Sony. And when they sold, actually, it's when TomTom took off. You know, because in 2000, Sony thought, well, that's it. You know, we've tried for now 6 years, hasn't taken off. Nobody's going to use GPS. And of course, then TomTom came along, and today, where we would be without GPS. But if Sony hadn't started back in '94 and buying ETAC, the company that I was running, then probably we wouldn't be where we are today with GPS. You know, and that's why it was important for me to go back in 1989 when I moved to San Francisco in Silicon Valley, and I used the first internet system, and thinking, you know, at the time we could only share recipes using CompuServe, and it was with these modems that were very flaky, and most of the time you couldn't connect or anything, but you could see that there was a potential. And so, and obviously now today we're 5G and, you know, bandwidth and no latency. And so today, you know, it's unbelievable when you look back what we can do today, but compared to what our grandchildren are going to see, it's nothing. It's nothing. But if we don't go through what we've been through, our grandchildren basically wouldn't be able to do anything. It's like I say in the book, if my grandparents had said no to electricity or the telephone, would we have a mobile phone today? I don't think so, right? So it's that journey that has started even before us and will continue after us.
And just one point on that before Pauli comes in there. It's just, I think one of the big points you make in your book, though, Nicolas, is that, you know, while these inventions, you know, they come along, they might be new and they may not always work at the point in time. Yeah. They lay the foundation for later versions, or in fact, completely new inventions that were not even thought about at the time. And that's fascinating.
Absolutely. And that's why I thought it would be interesting to understand. And so I made this book because I have a lot of friends and a lot of family members who are scared, you know, 5G. I mean, you know, a big Chinese company asked me to write an article about 2 years ago about the fact that 5G could not broadcast, if I could say, COVID, because I don't know if you remember in the UK and in the US, a lot of people would burn down 5G masts because they were worried about 5G helping dissemination of COVID. So thinking that really got me thinking, you know, like if people are ready to pay me to write an article explaining why it's impossible that a virus could be spread on electronics, I thought it's interesting to make people understand that they shouldn't be worried about 5G. And on top of it, I was extremely lucky because I was there for the launch of 3G and 4G. And every time we had to go through the same thing. So for 3G, a lot of people, and 4G as well, people were thinking that we would have brain cancer and that there will be a surge in brain cancer, which we haven't really seen since. I mean, obviously there have been cases, and I don't want to dismiss that, but you know, it's always change management. It's always about change management. That's about what digital transformation is all about, and that's why technology needs to be understood so people can really see that, yes, there are risks, but if they know what the risks are, then they'll feel more comfortable using the technology.
And I think it's really interesting because I would probably say, Nicolas, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're probably on more the optimistic side of the equation, you know, when it comes to technology. Sure. And I suppose there's no surprise there given your background. And I was very interested, I think in the book, you know, you're talking about that humans are naturally very innovative, you know, and that we will always innovate our way out of problems, etc. But at the same time, you're also pointing out that there's large tracks of people maybe that are more pessimistic and worried about technology. But also, why is it that given a trajectory that's upwards, that organizations struggle so much with innovation?
Well, again, because it's innovation will force them to change, right? before COVID, I've been in digital transformation since maybe 2012, 2013. And the way we did it with very large French companies, we would buy startups and incorporate the startups technologies within our old products. And the products we had were from the 1930s, and they have been obviously improved and everything. But that's the way we used to do it. And then COVID came in. And seriously, I used to talk to the CEO of many other companies, and they would say, you know, at the time, it's just an example, but they would say, yeah, as long as I'm a CEO, nobody's going to work from home. There's no way. It's like holidays without saying it's holidays. People don't do anything at home. They'll take care of the kids. No way. There was one guy who was really, really strong about this. And I really wanted to call him during the first confinement, you know, thinking, oh, really? You think nobody's going to work from home now? And that's why, you know, COVID has put us our back to the wall, basically. And we've been forced to change. And therefore, it has been maybe a little bit easier. But, you know, change management is the hardest thing you have to do. I was a leader at Sony. I was a leader at many other companies. And the thing is, you know, obviously, if I think it's Einstein used to say that, you know, if you always do this thing over and over, you will never get different results, because you do the same thing and you'll get the same results each time. So if you want to improve, and especially because, you know, you have the millennials coming onto the market, and these guys, they were born with internet, right? They were born with PlayStation or Xbox. They were born with everything, finding everything online. I remember I really felt old when at Sony one day there was this intern who came in, and I was asking him questions, and he would go immediately on the internet thinking, oh yeah, of course, he has the answer. But, you know, I seriously, back in 2005 or whatever, I didn't think about even checking. And so that's why it's the reason why companies are struggling with innovation is because they are struggling with the vision and understanding how it could improve and change their way of working. And this is why I believe our roles, the three of us and others also who are involved in digital transformation, is to make people feel comfortable about changes. And they have to understand that we're not trying to do a revolution, but it's an evolution. Right? So evolution, sorry, that's the French accent kicking in sometimes. So it's definitely not, and it's all needs to be done step by step, right? And if for some reason people in the company don't feel comfortable, then it's for the consultant to say, hang on guys, I don't think we're ready yet. We need to put more time. We need maybe to understand a different way of managing this. And this is how you're going to do it. I mean, people will just say, okay, from tomorrow, we're going to use AI everywhere. We're going to have a big data structure everywhere, and we're going to use all the data everywhere to check everything. And you salespeople, you don't use the Rolodex anymore, and then they will fail, right? So this is what I'm trying to say always is innovation is important. You need to be aware of what can do, but innovation is everything in innovation is not for everyone. What I'm saying is that companies, maybe some companies, for example, my local baker or whatever, he will only need to use Excel, and that's a digital transformation for him, right? And you have companies that today have CDOs, chief data officers, and things like that. And these companies, obviously, for them, using Excel has been done for a long time. And what they need now is a different data structure, is a different use of the data. And this is why it's important, is be aware of what's out there, and use people, you know, who are not going to make your business redundant from one day to the other. Use people who are who would do step-by-step approach, which I think is the best way when you do change management project.
Nicolas, one question though. In the book you talk about, I think it's the Sony Walkman, and the guy walking around with he had the headset on, and he had the little box. And everyone said, "Show me this thing," and there was a hole, and the hole was, "That's the battery that you need to make for me." So yeah, that was the unreasonable guy sort of saying, "Look, this is possible. You guys just need to help me figure out how to make it possible." So I absolutely agree with you in terms of you know the change management and mindset and all that sort of stuff. But do you need that innovation champion as well?
Absolutely. This is why I mentioned several times, you know, the consultant or the and it's nice to have somebody, and I'm preaching for my choir obviously here, but it's nice to have somebody from outside your company, because otherwise you don't think outside the box. You think about how you always been doing your business and how you will continue doing it. When you have somebody who looks at your business and says, well, hang on, there's a different way to make it work, and has obviously the right expertise, the right know-how and everything, and is trusted, because trust is, to me, I always ask companies, what are your values? And when I see that trust is top of the value, then I know there's at least the first sign that we could be successful. But it's really important that you have a champion, and outside the company, but that outsider basically will need to find a champion inside and do a transition, because obviously an outsider who just comes in, doesn't have the contacts, or only knows one or two people, is not enough. But that's our role, as digital transformation champions, is to make sure that at least we find the right people within the company to help us succeed in the project.
And I've seen a sort of, I suppose, some data, Nicolas, that shows that the ability of organizations to create technologies is far greater than their ability to actually adopt technologies. And I think that's really fascinating, that we can create the instruments of change, but we're far slower actually changing. And also there's sort of some stats which show that people change quicker than organizations.
Absolutely.
And I'm always amazed that people will do stuff in their own private lives that either they're prevented from using or they don't use then in organizations. And I know you've traveled through lots of organizations, different cultural areas. I'm not sure, have you seen even differences culturally across different countries in terms of maybe some of those dynamics?
Yeah. Well, there are 2 points in your points. I think the first one, if I could refer, is the fact that people, on their free time or whatever, they do a lot of things. That is what Google, as the first company to understand that. I don't know if you remember, at the beginning when Google started, they said, okay, we'll pay, obviously your salary, but your salary wanted 80% for you to work on Google's project and 20% to work on your own project. Results of that, Gmail was invented by a Google employee, not on Google's time, right? I think everybody knows the story, but it's good to remember, because you're absolutely right. Digital transformation is not only about accepting innovation coming from outside, it's also, this is what I used to say to all my staff, and some people were very strange, like even the receptionist might wake up one day and say, I have this idea for the business. Well, yeah, great. Everybody can help. And this is what's important. And your second point, sorry, I got carried away. I forgot what you just.
And look, and I think culturally, like,
the culture, have you
seen differences?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry. And the culture angle, definitely. I see that countries coming, US, UK, Anglo-Saxons, even Nordic countries are more inclined to accept change than the old continent. I think there's somebody who used to mention that about us. And I see that. I have a lot of French customers. I have Italian customers, and I see that it's less part of our DNA than what we see. The US for me is champion in that. In Italy, you mentioned new technology, you mentioned a new project about digital transformation or anything. If you're good at explaining why, then they'll go for it and go very fast. Whereas in France, you really have to take your time, and it's okay. It's a cultural change. Germany is half and half. Germany, if they understand how good it could be for their business, they can go fast. But first, you need to prove yourself. In France, it's not only you need to prove yourself, but you really need to spend time with people, and this is where I had found in France, because I have some customers there here as well. It's where really you have to spend more time than in US or UK. In a project in England or Ireland or the US in general, in 6 months it can be done. In France, you're talking about a year to a year and a half. for the same type of projects.
Because I wonder though, our organizations are now starting to operate at two levels, because in the book, and I love the phrase you used, you said Gen Z, no, call it Gen G. So Gen Google or Gen Gamers, and I have two of them here, and I can absolutely empathize with you. So in every country though, we have these Gen Zs who are used to technology, or used to gaming technology, or used to Google, all these things. They're now in the workforce. So one of the points, and Ken Russell picked up there, you talked about putting people at the heart. Well, every company must have this cultural cohort that is so comfortable with technology. So is that true, or is that a broad assumption? And if so, how do we tap into that?
No, number one, yes, companies have that, but also and the most important is your customers are these type of people who are born with Google, who are born with games. So not only you need to ensure that inside your employees, are comfortable with it, and that's the biggest challenge, because you're going to have old fox like me, who also, and maybe who are not as interested in innovation, who have to work with these young guys. Because obviously, if you're CEO of a company, you need to think about the future of the company. It's not the future of Nicolas Babin. It will be the future of Sony. It will be the future of all the other companies that I work for. And that's where it's difficult, is what's the bridge between the generations. And, when I started working, I'm the one who was flexible enough to be able to work with older people, whereas today it's older people who have to be flexible enough to work with younger generation, if you see what I mean. So this has changed a lot, because we've had a huge evolution in terms of use of technology. And this is why, and it's a challenge, because obviously you don't want to get rid of your head of sales who's 55 years old, because he has huge knowledge and he knows all the customers and everything, but you need to help him transform himself in order to be able to work with younger people who are not going to have a Rolodex, who are going to do all their business on their phone, who prefer to work from home or sometimes come in the office, who don't want to wear a tie, or granted, today nobody wears a tie anymore, except if you're in politics or finance. But these are just examples of how you need to understand that, and this is why I always repeat that, but and I've said it 2 or 3 times already, but digital transformation is not about digital, it's about people, and that's really important. Digital will help, and digital is basically helping people to change. It's not the other way around, meaning you cannot be forced by technology to change. You need to force technology to help you change. Am I clear on what I'm saying? Yeah. That's why it's really important. And I know we call it digital transformation, but to me it's more like transformation. It's more about change management. And there's an element of it, obviously, which is about new technology and digital, which comes in very handy at once you've figured out what you need to do to help your employees and help your customer experience to improve.
Yeah, and I suppose it still amazes me, Nicolas. Like I'd be very aware of large companies, and I suppose some would say they were blind to some trends, or they missed trends. And yet, if you look at their own employees, and they're not just young employees, right into 30s, 40s, involved in open source software development projects when they go home in the evening. They're involved in using technologies in their own lives. And these are the very same technologies that they're using or developing outside of work that disrupts the company that they're employed by. And so I'm not sure it's just training either. I don't know exactly what it is, but these companies shouldn't be blindsided by a lot of the things that they end up being disrupted by.
Correct. Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. That's the key. That's the key element to make a project work. Absolutely.
But Nicolas, in that space though, I mean, because you mentioned that you've been involved in a lot of things, not all of them have worked. So is part of this, yes, we want to innovate, but we recognize not everything's going to be a success.
Yes.
And creating the environment where people feel comfortable in that.
Absolutely.
Because
and this is and this is why it's so hard in France or Spain or Italy, because failure is not part of the success, whereas failure needs to be part of the journey. You know, and that's it. And you guys in the Anglo-Saxon world, you understood that a long time ago. You know, I mean, out of 26 companies that I created, I failed maybe 20 times. You know, and I'm not ashamed to say that, because the 6 times I succeeded was because I failed before, right? And if life was easy, you know, and everything you touch is a success, then it's boring. Sorry to say, but this is not what I would expect. So that's why, you know, the change management comes from DNA pretty much. And Americans, I think I saw a report not a long time ago saying that every American has at least 4 different careers in their life. They change all the time, basically. Whereas I think it was like in France, they used to have 1 and now it's like 2. Whereas in the US, it's at least 4. You know, so it's because they realized, well, you know, and on top of it, in America, you need to bounce back very quickly, because, you know, you lose your job from one day to the other. You don't have any unemployment or anything, and you have a 2-week period where, you know, basically you don't have a work contract. It's just a letter of employment. So you need to really find your next gig very quickly. Whereas in France, or I think Ireland is not as bad as France, but in France you have at least 3 months notice period. And then you have the government helping you for another year or 2 and things like that. So environment also creates the story and behind the way people should behave. And that's why, you know, going back to your earlier question about cultural, I think that's why you see Anglo-Saxon countries being much more interested in change than countries where it's pretty comfortable, you know, to stay in your job your whole life. Look in Japan. I worked in Japan. I lived in Japan, and these guys, they normally start with a company and they stay until the end. Things have changed in the last 2 or 3 years because of COVID, because of a lot of things. And I don't know if you remember, but about 5-10 years ago, there were a lot of suicide in Japan because people were laid off, which never happened in Japan, ever. You start in a company and it's like you normally find your wife or your husband with that company, and it's part of your family. So, you know, cultures are, and this is why it's so interesting. You know, I've lived in Japan, I've lived in Europe, obviously I lived in the US, I lived in the UK, and I have been able to see all this. And, you know, and what I've learned from all this is like, the culture is not going to please Nicolas Babin. Nicolas Babin has to adapt to all the cultures, and then after that, make it an asset.
There's a point in there, Nicolas, from Rosemary Foley, and she says gamification is totally underestimated in firms, and you know,
I agree.
I know it's an area you're really passionate about. You know, so how does that help in the environment or in the innovation, or what's your sense of it?
So gamification, just to give you a little bit of history about that, back in 2004, I became head of communication and product marketing for Sony Europe. And I was meeting all the time with people from Sony Computer Entertainment, which is the PlayStation. And I'm a big gamer. I've always loved games. Everybody loves games, I have to be honest. And a game is part of the DNA. There's not one person on earth that doesn't play. I mean, even if old people say, oh, I never play, and you go and see them and they have crosswords or whatever, this is a game, right? So you have different game mechanics, but everybody likes to play. I mean, dinosaurs used to play to teach their kids how to hunt. So game is part of our culture. And so in 2004, I kept asking my counterpart at Sony Computer Entertainment, saying, you know, great if I could get people into a state of mind, the same state of mind that when you play a game. So you're in a PlayStation game and you can spend 2 or 3 hours, and then suddenly you look at your watch and say, wow, where has time gone, right? And during that time, you can, you know, share messages, and people are very engaged to their game. They are it's immersive. You're within the environment. And this is what we see today with Metaverse, by the way. And I totally agree that gamification is underrated today in companies, because again, it's a change management process. And as soon as you start talking about game, then you have people say, oh, it's not serious. It's a game. We're in a business. We're serious, right? I've had that 100 times. So it's important that today, as part of the digital transformation, the gamification comes in, because with gamification, you're going to have great engagement. You're going to have great loyalty, because once you have a good experience, you have dopamine flowing through your system, you will always remember that great experience. And it's all about that CX, customer experience, right? You have a good experience with the brand. They treat you well. You've had, from the time you contact them to the time you finish your purchase, or even after that, when your product is as a default or whatever, you will always remember. You will think, wow, such a great experience. Of course, I want to buy it from them again. And that's where gamification can help. So to me, gamification needs to be done at all levels of a company, even in finance, which is the hardest part, because of course in finance everybody's very serious. But in finance also, you know, sometimes it's boring to enter numbers into an Excel spreadsheet or into a software. Well, if you can have some elements of fun in that, you can have more people engaged and more people who want to do things, and so therefore productivity is going to go higher. And this is what's so important. So I totally agree with the question. I'm sorry, I don't look at the questions because you're asking me all these questions. So if I, on top of it, look at the chat, then I'm lost.
Yeah, and I think there's a little nuance in Rose's question as well. Rose's, again, maybe back to a previous point, and maybe we've already answered it, Nicolas, though. Rose is saying, though, people that are gamers at home are learning these collaborative problem-solving skills. They're learning digital skills, etc. And then next thing, they have to leave all of it. They have to nearly leave their own identity outside the door when they go into that office next morning, you know. And also, I suppose, what did Rose say, you know, in the workplace, I often feel I'm not permitted to use those problem-solving skills, you know. So I think that's an interesting point, again, back to an earlier point.
But I mentioned it, yeah, I mentioned it before, saying that this is, you know, you need to make sure that at least the people who like games, they feel that, you know, their environment is replicated inside the company as well. Otherwise, you're going to lose talent.
Yeah, and of course, I suppose the original pilot of the metaverse is gaming, really. So again, if we want to understand the metaverse, where it's likely to go for organizations, it's nearly that community we need to be looking at. Nicolas, again, I'm intrigued. In the book, you list out a lot of technologies. How do you sort of keep an eye on what's emerging and what's going to be big, what isn't going to be big? Do you absorb a set of skills, techniques around it? Is it more gut feel? Is it by immersing yourself in them? What can we learn from you, Nicolas?
That's the beauty of having no hair, is you have a lot of experience, at least. So basically, my common denominator is data, right? So I read a lot about data. And as data is the basics of everything, you know, I choose what interests me. So obviously, my book doesn't talk about metaverse because it came out just before Zuckerberg came, and it's true. I mean, the environment of metaverse, and that's really important, by the way, to say that Meta, the Facebook company, is not the metaverse. It's one element of the metaverse. But this environment, you know, if you read the book, you understand that all these technologies together will create an environment that will make sure that at least you engage, or it's immersive, and it's a different way of doing business, because that's the most important to me element of the metaverse is the fact that you can, you know, buy things. You have an economy which lacked into the Second Life project back in 2002, if I remember correctly. Sorry, I forgot your question. What was it?
So you know, this whole waves of technology coming towards us. How do you make sense of it? How do you sort of filter what's likely to have an impact and not?
Yeah, and so basically, when I look at the new use of data, and when I understand how companies basically can organize the data and can benefit from data, and also, you know, I've been following for years some specific newspapers, magazines, leaders on social media like Tony and things like that. So I read what they come out with, and I know that if Tony or myself or anybody else, you know, that we follow within our group are interested in the technology, you know that there's a chance that this will come out and be a success. But I have, you know, sometimes I fail, and I thought some ideas, and of course nothing comes to mind now, but there were some ideas I remember back about 10 or 15 years ago that I thought, wow, yeah, this could be really really big, and actually it didn't come out as big at all. And it's hard because sometimes, and that's why I say in the book, there's some technologies that I mentioned in the book that honestly I've not done anything at the time it was launched, but as today are really important in order to make sure that at least, you know, as part of an environment, those technologies can help. And it's really hard, but what I do is I read. I wake up and you know, I start reading, and that's how I see what's in there. There's some great companies coming out with great videos that explain also what you can do, and this is how I keep myself abreast of all this.
Nicolas, you mentioned data, and I know you're also in the book, you talk about data very specifically in terms of, I think you talk about science without conscience, and you talk about, you know, data being really at the heart of absolutely everything, and that, you know, be forewarned, because not every actor is a good actor. And I know Poddy runs a series called the Data Transformation Series, so it's an area that's, you know, everyone's kind of somewhat conscious of, but not necessarily focusing the way you're sort of saying, yeah, look, this can be really good, but there are watch outs as well. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, as soon as you start talking about digital, you start talking about possible hackers, you start talking about cybersecurity, you start talking about, I mean, and we've seen it with the war in Ukraine, right? Cybersecurity has been a huge impact, has had a huge impact on the war in Ukraine, because you have people who understand all these systems and can enter and get data. Of course, you know, before digital was out, all companies, they used to have all their customers listing and everything on papers. And if somebody would break in and go into a company and steal, you know, all the folders and everything, then they would have access to all the information about you and I, our date of birth, and if somebody would break into your doctors, they would have access to all the information that were very confidential. The thing with digital, obviously, it's available on the server, right? It's available somewhere that could be accessed by a lot of people. So this is why I think I mentioned several times in the book, I say, no, I'm not naive. And yes, I'm very optimistic, and I've always been optimistic, and that's the nature, and that's my nature. But it's also very important to understand that, yes, there are risks. And we mentioned the risks, you know, as soon as you start having an HR system, obviously, all the data will be coming in. As soon as you start posting anything, people start to know you. They know I post a lot of things about sustainability, about SDG, about use of technology to help save the planet. So they know it's a matter that, you know, close to my heart. So there's no secret. I mean, if somebody wants to hire me, basically you tap Nicolas Babin and you have all the information. So what's important is that, you know, you knowing all this, that you're very careful about what you publish. Obviously, you know, I'm not going to start publishing about rugby. I thought I could. Sorry, I'm all
No, and you could indeed. France are doing extraordinary well these days.
No, but what I'm saying is the risks are there. And the risks are there to continue, because of course, with metaverse, you're going to have NFTs. With NFTs, they are, you know, the fact that NFTs are just been coming in the last 2 or 3 years. Obviously, we have already a lot of know-how, and we understand what needs to be done in order to avoid those hackers and all this. But even with that, you know, you need to be extremely careful about who's going to use your data and what can they do with your data. And this is why I wrote the book. You know, at the end, I finished the book by saying forewarned is forearmed, right? Your English expression. So, and I really want this book to make you wiser, because if you understand what can be done and the pluses, in each plus, there's a negative, obviously. But if you understand the benefit of the plus and you prevent yourself, or you plan for the worst, then at least it will not happen, or at least it will be harder for people to make it more difficult. But one thing is for sure is, today we all do online banking, right? At the beginning, it was extremely scary because anybody could have your information. Everybody could come into your account and steal money from you. It does happen, but today we have legislation in place where banks basically reimburse you. Banks, they have the means to find who has done that and try to get the money back from these people. So it's the more advanced we are, it's like in healthcare, right? 10, 15 years ago, you had colon cancer and it was a death sentence. Today, it's not anymore because we've been working on it. It's the same thing if you look at with digital. The more we work with it, the more we understand where the risks can come from, and the more we can be very careful about it. And it's again, I mentioned it several times, we're in a journey. We can't stop. We can't go back. We can't say, okay, now we stop electricity, we stop the phone, there's no way. So we need to go forward, but we need to go forward fully knowing what the risks are in order to prevent them.
And I remember, Nicolas, I think it was in your profile actually when I was looking at it, you mentioned that you were, I think, in Sony when the big data breach happened. Did it lose 70-odd million
Yep.
records belong to people? And I love your saying though that trying to be forearmed based on maybe experience from the past. What have you learned from that, or what advice could you give to other companies? When it comes to, it must have been an incredibly difficult time to have been at Sony.
Yeah, and what I've learned is to be transparent from this time, because at the time when that happened, it was at the time when companies would feel very uncomfortable and would be like, not lying, obviously, but trying to hide a little bit of the truth. But when you're transparent and you're totally open to, well, this is what happened, guys. We obviously have made a mistake, and an honest mistake, because we didn't think it was possible. Because if I remember correctly, it was PlayStation, so I was Sony Electronics, but I was there. But it was on PlayStation. I think many hundreds of thousands of millions of people had their data stolen. And what I've learned is like, say, okay, guys, this is what happened. This is what we're going to do to fix it. We're really sorry, because you need to be humble about these things, because obviously you've made a mistake. But again, this is where failure is part of the success, right? Because if somebody hadn't breached in, you could have carried on maybe for 2, 3, 4, 5 years until somebody would come in, and then you would not have been millions, it would have been hundreds of millions of people, right? So this is really where I've learned, to embrace the truth and say, hang on, guys, it has happened again. Sorry, it will not happen again, and make sure it does not happen again.
Yeah, I think there's one of the things, and it's kind of related, I suppose, in some ways. In the book, you talk about, look, in the future, everything is going to be connected, right? And everything is going to be more intelligent. And I think the point that really struck me was you said that includes people, process, data, and objects. So maybe talk about the pluses and minuses that you see happening in this world.
Well, today I think we have more objects connected than people connected. We have new technologies such as 5G that allow, and that was built around IoT, the Internet of Things. So the process is basically that not only people can connect, but objects can connect too, to help people augment. And this is what it's all about. It's augmented people. That sentence doesn't come from me, but I'm using it regularly because, when I talk about AI and when I launched the robot behind, it was exactly that. People say, "Oh, I'm scared." I mean, once I was at Old Trafford shopping center in Manchester, and I came out and we were showing the robots. It was really at the beginning, and one guy jumped on one eyeball and ripped his head off, and said, "This robot will not replace me." And people are scared of that, right? And so that's why it's really important that they understand that technology is here to augment them and to give them all the information that will help them be better optimized in everything. And that's what I mean with IoT and Internet of Things. You're going to have such a huge amount of data coming in. And once you have organized that data with the big data infrastructure, and you are able to to analyze the data, infuse the data, as IBM would say, then the data will make sense. So if I go back to healthcare, right, a doctor with all this amount of data and connected objects, for example, that we have today with watches, with heartbeat, or all these things, blood pressure and all these things, glucometer, if you have diabetes, things like that. A human brain is not capable of managing all this information. It's not possible. It's too much information. This is where technology comes in, sorts out all the different data, and gives you all information that you need at the right time, right? So your doctor, he sees you, he doesn't need to know, if he sees you about diabetes problem, he won't need to know about you having a muscle ache when you were 18, right? But that muscle ache from when you were 18 might be important for your cardiologist, because now that maybe then, you know, there's a problem with his body structure or whatever. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I can't tell you if it really has an importance. But what I'm saying here is like data, and data coming from all this information, IoT being one. And if you process all this and you process it in a smart, intelligent way, then all this information will make you a very strong augmented human. And that this is what I mentioned in the book.
You know, and I think it was during the week as well, Nicolas, and I think you saw the comment maybe from Dara, asking about, you know, I think it was the Boston Dynamics robot Spot, you know, yeah. And it amazed me, you know, it was on a live show, you know, and people were gooing and gang that isn't it lovely.
I was on a live show in the UK too with IBO back in 2000.
And actually that's my question then, Nicolas. So what amazed me was where people loved when it was there on the stage, but when it started walking towards them in the audience, you could see them literally trying to move away. But should Sony have stayed to a greater extent in that market? Should they be now market leaders in that space? Or maybe you'd say they are. But what happened to Sony in that space?
Well, back in 2005, we had the Sony shock, where our results were terrible, and we had not gone into the TV evolution with LCDs. We had stayed with the tubes, the cathodic tubes. And our Walkmans were not as successful as Apple's because our technology A-Track was not MP3, which was then very proprietary to Sony. And so people did not buy into that. So the Sony shock, basically, Sony had to decide which business they were going to take. We were profitable, but not greatly profitable with the robotic division. And so Sony decided to stop that division. They restarted back in 2018 at CES in Vegas. They launched the new ERS 1000, which is the father of the one just behind me. So, you know, again, it's like GPS. Sony stopped in 2000, started to pick up in 2005. Sony stopped I mean, you can talk about VHF, you know, Sony was not on the VHF side. Sony was on the Blu-ray side, which was a success, but then Blu-ray stopped pretty much because you have streaming content now much stronger. So yes, Sony should have stayed in many other business, but I think what they do is right. They need to focus on what works today, right? And PlayStation is a huge success. TV Sonys are great. Sony's just come out with the Xperia 1.4, the new telephone, which I have a son who's at the university in Montreal, and he told me it's the best one on the market. And I'm about to write an article about it because it takes all the Sony know-how and expertise into one telephone. So the Sony Columbia TriStar, Sony the movie side, the Sony Music Entertainment, so the music side, the electronics, the games. It's just a brilliant phone, unbelievable. And so, you know, Sony should have stayed, of course, in a lot of businesses because it's true, it was fun. But at the time, they could afford it. Back in 2000, Sony was the biggest entertainment electronic company in the world, right? So, yeah, of course, as I said before, life is not always easy, and things go up and down, and Sony has known that. But I think they're back. I think I'm very very pleased to see that they're doing great in some products. Like the cameras, for example, Alpha 7, I launched the Alpha 1. So now I see the Alpha 7 and it's a fantastic camera. So yeah, there are many things that could have done differently, but Apple is gonna, I mean, Apple has seen it, because Apple, when they launched, was very successful. And then we know what happened when Steve Jobs left, and now it's back. But again, they need to reinvent themselves all the time, right? Because I just saw that they stopped now the iPod, right? So it's changing, and it's hard to be at the top all the time. Yeah, but they're still at the top for many businesses. PlayStation.
Yeah, it's probably a case of choices and timing, and I think it's just like as it comes through in your book. I mean, this was back in 1999, so an AI-enabled robot dog was probably very revolutionary, and it was way out there. Whereas today, it's kind of, well, that's kind of normal, is it not? And we forget these things because there's just so much has happened in the last 20, 30 years. Yep. I mean, the iPhone didn't exist in 2007, well, until 2007.
And I want to answer a question that there was from somebody before the podcast saying, how did Sony come up with the design of the dog? And basically, it was we had I remember we were thinking really hard, because the first robot had 6 legs and it looked like a robot. It was really, there was a box, electronic box, 6 legs, like Meccano type legs. And then we thought, we need to be very careful, because people are going to react poorly to a robot that could scare them. So we thought of either a cat or a dog, right? So the first one, I don't know if you remember, was the long ears. The ERS 110 had long ears and a tail, and it looked a little bit funny, but we were back in 1999, and it was not that easy to make a dog. So the second one, the ERS 210, which was the most successful one, looked a little bit friendlier. And this one was actually designed in the London design, Sony London design office, which was sorry, I forgot the name of the office. Anyway, it was in the financial district in London, a bank. We had a big office there, and they wanted something fun. So if I can move around so you can see it a little bit. So a nose that's funny, with ears that's funny, and react differently. But all of them have the same core, basically. And then after that, it was just, for us to make sure that at least it would not scare people. The ERS 1000 that just came out in 2018 looks more to me like a toy. And this is where I differ from the Sony strategy, because if your robot looks more like a toy, then people will not spend 2,000 euros on a toy, right? So you need to have it at least a little bit robotic in order for people to understand what it said. But to answer the question, it was really basically a flip of the coin, where we decided to go for the dog rather than the cat, and where we decided to go for the easier looking, not as scary type of dog with the ERS 110.
And you sold 5,000 in 20 minutes in Guinness Book of Records.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't checked lately, but I think it was sold for a long time in the Guinness Book of Records. Yeah.
And and we're probably coming towards the end now, Nicolas. And I know you are maybe looking more out there than a lot of companies are at the moment. And you made the point very well that Sony sort of pulled back and focused in on certain areas. If you were to advise companies now as to what emerging technologies they should be looking at going forward, what would be on your list?
Number one is metaverse. And a lot of people are saying, well, I don't think you're right about this. We saw what happened with Second Life and everything, but we've moved so far from Second Life. The reason why I'm saying metaverse is because I see all these huge companies, Nike, Carrefour, all the big banks, all the big insurance companies and everything pouring money, obviously Meta, Facebook, pouring money. And, we've never seen this before. We're talking about over billions of dollars that are pulled in. And the fact that there's an economy around it, I think people today are looking, the fact that NFTs are successful, it's because people are looking, for non-traditional way of investing. Stock market, it's been going on for a long time. It needs to transform itself. And I believe that NFT and cryptocurrencies are about transforming the investment that people are making. And this is why, any company today can basically benefit from metaverse and diverse their way of doing business. The way I advise my customers is, there are three type of businesses in every company. You have the cash cow business, which is basically 80% of your business and the cash that brings to the company. And it's about business that's been going on for a long time. And you still need people basically who have been trained for this, and you need and you need the know-how basically that you've had for years for that. Then you have the second type of your business, which is about 20%, 15% of what it brings to the company. But you know that within 3 to 5 years, this is going to be your number one business. It will kick the number one. And then you have the third one, the third leg, if I could say, which is the startup type of disruptive type of technology, which brings between 0 and 5% of money today. But you know that this within 10 to 15 years will become your main business. And this is what it's all about. It's the transformation is all about that. And you need to invest with not only financial, but also talent, right? And again, in each category of these three categories, you're going to need different type of talents. The talents you would need for the third business that doesn't bring much money today is very different from the business that brings 80% of your company money. And this is why it's important. A lot of people, the millennials and everything, they want to be in the third type of business, right? They want to innovate, they want to have fun, and whereas the people more my age or whatever, they'll start being in the first type of business. The second time is the toughest one to find in terms of talent and everything. But it's really important to me that a CEO sees those three elements and understand. And to me, the metaverse today is not going to bring a lot of money for the next 2-3 years, but it needs to be part of the third strategy or the third category for the vision, because that within 5 to 10 years, metaverse is going to be your main business. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and I think, and I love that options investing thing, that you not only need to stay in there as well, and that's maybe one thing. I wouldn't criticize Sony, but when you withdraw completely from space, it's very hard to go back into it again. Whereas that options investing thing is you're just always trying to keep out in the vanguard, even if it's in the research labs or whatever else.
I will never criticize Sony. I mean, honestly, I've stayed 15 years with them. It's the best company I've ever worked for. I've loved every single minute of working with Sony. I love that company still today. I mean, my wife still believes we live in in Sony warehouse. Every time there's a new product, I buy it.
And I see Rose here also saying, I'm delighted Sony stuck with games consoles, some fantastic games available. So I think that's maybe a happy customer talk. Tony, over to you to close it up.
Yeah, well, look, Nicolas, been a blast. So thank you so much, Nicolas. And if you haven't read Nicolas's book, The Talking Dog, it is a great read because it takes you right through everything. So I want to thank Nicolas, thank my co-host, Dr. Paddy O'Reilly, thank our steering committee, thank you, our audience. It's been great. And to thank Cork University Business School for their continued support and encouragement. So fantastic session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.